David Bowie began 1969 as far from his pop ambitions as he'd been throughout the 60s.
Once when we were both a bit broke, we both went to audition for Hair, you know, the musical where everyone in the end takes their clothes off. We both got turned down.
He had a job in a copying office in London, a place called Ligastat, but he only did it about once a fortnight. He hated it. And he had the odd gig here and there, but no, he was broke. I supported him for quite some time.
Everything that he had, he put to good use. And okay, you know, if it meant being a bit slutty occasionally or whatever, you did what you had to do in order to get to the next level in the business.
He was entirely, totally and completely focused.
I think when you are driven, when you really got something to say, then inevitably you're going to make sure that you achieve that, and that definitely applied to David.
He was absolutely dedicated to his career. I mean, music was the focus of his life. During the time when he was sitting around the flat not doing very much, he was constantly composing. He was never idle.
Are you being absolutely accurate and honest when you say you're a disciplined person?
Oh, yes.
You impose a discipline on your own music writing, on your own work, do you? I mean, you don't just get up when you know what I'm saying to you. A lot of people in your position have a kind of reputation.
A discipline doesn't mean that you make sure that you have breakfast at 8 o'clock in the morning, right, and you are out of the house by 8:30. Discipline is that if you conceive something, then you decide whether or not it's worth following through, and if it's worth following through, then you follow it through to its logical conclusion. Good. And do it with to the best of your ability. That's the discipline. Yes?
Absorb that now.
Whether there are areas in it that are not to one's liking, you have to go right the way through it and do it, and that's what I do.
By the spring of 1969, Bowie was living with journalist Mary Finnegan in the London suburb of Beckenham.
He was living in my apartment as my lodger, but it was never a sort of conventional landlady-lodger relationship. He was extremely messy. He never did anything around the house unless it suited his purpose. He staged a very elegant seduction for me by cooking me a very nice dinner when I came home from a shift at the Sunday Times. And then he made a sort of nest of cushions in his room, and he put big speakers on either side of my ears and then played me his favourite music. I was pretty broke, and so was he, absolutely penniless, and our lifestyle was unsustainable. So he had the idea to start a folk club, and we found a location in a pub in Beckenham, and they gave us the back room, and in the first week there were about 25 people, second week there were 90, and after that it was absolutely jam-packed, never less than 120 crammed in.
The Beckenham Arts Laboratory, David based the whole idea of it on the existing Arts Laboratory in Drury Lane.
We took the psychedelic environment, ambiance, out of central London and set it up in the suburbs. And I think it was probably one of the first in a suburban environment.
London was so vibrant in those days. Everything just was exploding into this burst of colour.
It is often said that us fortunate people who were young in the 60s had the best sex, the best drugs, and the best music.
You know, you've got new magazines, new newspapers, new venues, new places to go, a new order. You know, this counterculture, as it was called, was a reality, and David loved it.
It was an arts laboratory. It was art of any form or variety. He compared it, and he performed his own set, and he got the confidence as a performer week after week after week. It was the bedrock of his rise to stardom, his ascent to the stratosphere. It was a brief slice of social history which was really quite remarkable, and I'm glad that I was part of that.
I thoroughly enjoy looking at myself and looking at the environment that I'm in at any time with the eyes of someone who's not involved in any particular line of the arts. So it comes out as a sort of eclectic manifestation, you know. So I'm still a fan of everything, fan of films, fan of records, fan of rock bands, and fan of yours.
As one of the most consistently great British songwriters of all time, David Bowie's skills as a lyrical storyteller remain unparalleled.
I don't have a problem writing. I do write a lot over the course of a year. It's never really been hard for me to do that. It wasn't painful in any way. And the only painful albums I've had, I think, were way back in the 70s. There were a couple of instances where it was really hard for me to write because I felt I was delivering great chunks of my soul at them. But that was a state of mind, I guess.
The other thing in the sort of mix of everything that sometimes gets neglected is David's brilliance as a songwriter.
David didn't write love songs at a time when everybody was writing love songs. You know, that's what you did. He didn't write love songs, and it was brilliant.
We would often go to something called the Gioconda Cafe, which is in Denmark Street, Tin Pan Alley, and you'd sit in this cafe and you'd nurse a cup of tea for hours, because at any moment anyone from the song publishing companies would rush in and say, "Oi, we need a bass player," or "Oi, we need a backing singer," and there you'd sit and wait till somebody came and called you in for something. So we spent a lot of time there.
We were looking for a comedy song for me to record, so I went along and met David, and I think it was just him and I. And I would have been about 22 and he'd have been about 20, I think. So he was a very young man and hadn't at this point changed his name to Bowie. And I was very struck by him. He was very serious, because I'm not overly serious, but he was quite, I felt, intense for a young man. I was beginning to wonder whether this man, who seemed quite serious, would have the element of comedy that was required for the thing that I was looking for. David had written this song called Over the Wall We Go.
Over the wall we go, oh, coppers and others. Over the wall we go, leave 'em.
He played it to me and I thought it was very funny. I said, yeah, I think that's a good song, let's have a go at that. So we went into the studio, recorded it. He introduced the character, which was a slightly more camp chap.
Double 3, 4, 2, 1.
David does a little bit in the middle where he does the roll call.
Double 3, 4, 2, 3. Oh, in here. Double 3, 4, 2, 4. Hello. Double 3, 4, 2, 5. Hi. Double 3, 4, 2, 6. Double 3, 4, 2, 6. Where is he?
And it was very big, it was very brash, very brassy, well arranged, and immediately got banned by the BBC. It was felt it was too. So I feel quite proud to have been associated with a song that was banned by the BBC. I suppose that's the difference between, I don't want to compare myself to him, but you know, I went off and had a fag and a laugh, and he stayed with it.
50 songs isn't enough, I've realised. You know, I heard Green with Envy, Dylan's got like 140 songs he chooses from, you know. And I can see that you've got to build up to that, because even when you've got 50, there are some that you're going to get fed up with faster than others. So that 50 becomes kind of a 30 with an unwritten 20 that you don't actually want to ever play again. So you're back to 30 again. So I think you have to go for at least 100 to then end up with like 50 that you like doing.
The root of Bowie's genius lay in his ability to write classic pop songs, and lots of them.
I take my work very seriously, but I try not to let it topple over into my psychological life too much and tear me apart like maybe it used to.
So is it very much work? I mean, are you able to kind of, or do you carry the whole thing with you throughout that period? Is it a necessary part, or are you to forget it and have your personal life?
No, it's always with me, but not quite the same way that it used to be. Probably the priority in my life is my domestic and private life, but it's reflected in my work.
The songwriting was the core of it all.
It's his songwriting will be remembered.
We're coming right back now to man and acoustic guitar. So you strip away all the other stuff and just bring it back to that. Voice and song. And David was absolutely world-class. His lyrics, if there wasn't any other lyric line but to see the mice in their million hordes from Ibiza to the Norfolk Broads, you know, you'd pin that as being one of the great lyric lines ever. And David seemed almost able to pull this stuff out almost effortlessly. That was the extraordinary thing.
I do see that the writing that I do is very much an integral part of my for real 24-hour-a-day life. I do write a little bit every day. Some days I hate it. It's an inconvenience, but it's just something I have to do. And some days I can't wait to sit down and write.
There was one, Cooks, which he wrote after Zoe Duncan had been born, and will you stay in my lover's story? But I was just thinking how sweet he'd written this for his son. A lot of things he wrote with such heart.
I have to be comfortable with what I'm doing. And if I feel there's a kind of as near to a truth or an integrity about what I do and write, then that makes me feel that I'm a successful artist, I guess.
Some of Bowie's lyrics owed their composition to the cut-up technique, popularised by the poet William Burroughs.
You take a song, and there it is in its right order. You cut it to pieces and then put it back together again randomly, and you are going to get the same words, they're just in a different order. But the ultimate meaning of the song remains the same. He wasn't a sort of artist chiseling away at the coalface of creativity. It just seemed to flow out of it.
In 1967, Bowie met his first wife, Angela Barnett.
She turned up one day after I'd been away, and I discovered that she'd more or less moved in with David. And I'm not quite sure why I allowed this to happen, but I was ousted and she replaced me as his lover.
He was the first one to say to me, look, I've met somebody, I think she's really special, I think you get on well with her.
I'm not going to bitch about Angie. She was turbulent. This can go on record, yeah. She was turbulent. She was a drama queen. She threw wobblies quite a bit. Some of them were just straightforward hissy fits. Others were designed to focus attention on her, and others to attract somebody that she wanted to impress.
Angie and I instantly hit it off. I mean, we were instantly good friends. And so I never had issues with, I was happy that he'd found somebody to be with him.
I allowed them to stay in the apartment. She was there pretty well all the time. Why did I do it? I wouldn't tolerate it for 30 seconds now. They would have been out on their ear.
Go down there most weekends and hang out with him and Angie.
I was having so much fun. I was enjoying it. The activity that went on around the arts lab and the continuous party. I mean, our house became the court of King David.
Angie was amazing in those days. She could literally give Angie a carrot and a potato and an onion, and she would make enough food to feed everyone because she was that organised.
She was very generous. She bought a lot of food and took us out to lots of nice outings.
She was the perfect foil for him. She was loud, but highly cultured. You know, she could speak French, she'd travelled, her parents were very nice, and she was there always for him.
We spoke French together, which irritated David no end. We'd both been at school in Switzerland, so we did have quite a common background.
He would be in his room often just lolling about with his acoustic guitar or bits of paper having ideas for songs, or sometimes he'd play a song to her. She always was positive. She would always say, "This is great."
In September 1969, they found their own apartment and they moved out. But we stayed friends. My love for him had changed a little bit pretty quickly because I was deeply pissed off about what had happened. But I was sad for a while, and then annoyed, and then resigned.
I read Mary Finnegan's book where she said, you know, she was devastated because he was being unfaithful. I didn't expect faithfulness from Bowie. I mean, he was a musician, for goodness sake. The two don't go together.
I didn't know what he got up to when he wasn't there. No, I found that out many years later.
Women that thought their hearts were broken were fools, basically, because you don't tame a man like Bowie, especially not in those early years.
Yeah, I was pretty upset, but it didn't last very long. I got over it.
In August 1969, Bowie and Finnegan organised a free music festival, which was held on the recreation ground in Beckenham.
That was kind of the peak experience. And about 1,000 people turned out, and we hardly publicised it at all. David was very sad. He was grieving because his father had died about a week earlier, and he performed as a true professional, and nobody who saw him performing would have known.
Right from the start, I was aware that David had a vision in terms of what he wanted to do and how he saw himself and the kind of music that he wanted to make. I was an aspiring DJ. My whole job was to fill the dance floor, and I'd invited David to come down with me because I thought this might be an opportunity for him to play. So he just started going out with Angie, and so she came to, I remember her sitting on the edge of the stage. David had a cassette of the backing track of the single that he was working on at the time. So I introduced him. Yeah, I'd been slamming out this really loud music, bass beats and all of that. And David came out with this little acoustic backtrack, which he then sang live over the top of. But I mean, the volume difference between my dance music and him was huge. And I mean, the floor cleared, people got restless, people were booing, people started throwing beer, and it was just got absolutely chaotic within almost moments. And David had to leave the stage. And I strode into the centre of the stage. I was absolutely furious. I said, "You remember this night? This is David Bowie. Remember the name. He's going to be huge." And I really knew it at the time. They just wanted to party And this rather sort of kooky acoustic alien that arrived on stage was a bit too much for them.
Throughout his career, David Bowie's style and image were inextricably linked with his music.
Bowie set trends, he created his own styles, his creative vision was about reinventing himself. That was something that no one had done before. Now lots of artists reinvent themselves all the time. We're very used to seeing that, but he was the first person to make himself the focus of his own kind of reinventions.
Do you see the way the people out there, how their appearances are changing during the tour? I mean, when they first saw you...
It's quite amazing because there's all 7 characters that I've created are out there somewhere. I see a man who fell to earth and a Ziggy Stardust and a Thin White Duke and at the moment a lot of sailors' hats and things. That's incredibly endearing.
Are you aware of the consequences of things that you do and say? I mean, is it possible to be relaxed, to act in a spontaneous way when everything you wear can be suddenly picked up by...
Well, it is at the moment because it's not that sort of outrageous, really. I mean, everybody wears plastic, don't they?
I cannot recall an artist who changed his or her image so frequently, so completely. This caused tremendous problems for his fans, who would turn up for his gigs dressed in last year's image and at the interval would look very sheepish because they realized they were wearing the wrong costume.
Have you come on a train like that today?
Yeah.
You came on the underground dressed like that. Did you get a bit of stick from the other passengers? I mean...
Sort of look at you here, wonder where you're going.
Probably singularly the most important artist in terms of style and fashion. I mean, you only got to look around the audience at a Bowie concert and it's a carbon copy of what's going on stage.
I was a compere on a few of the early tour dates. So from the stage, you're getting a pretty unique view of what's happening in front of you. And gradually you're beginning to see people arrive looking like David. Wow, I mean, you looked out at the whole audience and they'd all made a massive effort to kind of dress up and be Bowie.
Ziggy was his best character.
When you saw him do Ziggy on stage, what made you decide to look like that?
Just brilliant. Just everything you could imagine.
What's your name?
Ziggy Zowie.
Well, what was it before?
Well, my real name is Mandy Laming, but that's a bit boring.
Well, I've had the outfit for ages, really. It's just built up from sort of a long time ago. I just put it together when I saw his new film. Then I sort of got fed up at dyeing hair, and sort of as he sort of matured, you sort of grow out of it and want to sort of stay with him, so I just carried on doing that.
You think he's ahead of punk, or he just completely...
He's about 6 years ahead of it, I suppose, yeah.
I think he attracts the punks because they like the idea of somebody who's in a constant state of change and also doesn't represent the hippie period.
Why do you think they want to look like him? Wouldn't you? You seem really happy on stage to go through the old songs and to do them in a new way, and everybody obviously in the audience goes along with it.
Yeah, I'm having a very good time.
But can you tell me why it is, though, that your fans are happy to go along with your changes? Do you know what I mean? There are other performers that the fans...
Better ask them, I think.
Yeah, they all seem happy to spend 300 quid and come and see you on tour.
Yes. Is that how much my tickets are now?
No, that's how many concerts they've been to.
I know, it's quite amazing.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Bowie first tasted commercial success in 1969 when Space Oddity was released, as the world was transfixed with Apollo 11 and its journey of discovery.
I just thought it was the greatest song, just the most fantastic, fantastic original song.
People don't realize what a slow burn David was in the United States. Space Oddity was not a hit on its immediate release. It was only a hit after Elton had had Rocket Man, in America, and then Space Oddity became a hit, early '73. It's inconceivable to think that the albums we consider classics were not, upon release, popular in the United States.
I hadn't realised what an impact it was going to make, because it did actually. It suddenly put him out there as a little bit of the alien, which has stayed with him forever.
The song was used by the BBC for their coverage of the moon landing, and although it reached #1, success was far from assured. For all its brilliance, the public thought of it as a novelty record.
Then really not very much happened. He sort of disappeared from certainly any degree of success.
It wasn't that easy at the beginning, because he wasn't managed by anyone really good until to Freeze, but he did what he wanted.
I'd signed him for management and I signed him for records, and I think the greatest favour I ever did him was he had no interference whatsoever when he was recording, no input from a big record company, and that gave him a huge amount of freedom, which artists didn't usually have. They were just artists, they came, they went. No one thought they were going to make history.
Not everyone appreciated David Bowie's songwriting skills.
The first time I met Andrew Lloyd Webber, Starman was on the radio, and he said to me, "What do you think of this? He can't sing." I used to love rock. I love the Everly Brothers, but I'm losing touch. I don't like this. And of course, that was the change in his writing, away from Jesus Christ Superstar, which had been a so-called rock opera.
I was the first Mary Magdalene in Jesus Christ Superstar.
And that was a very daring thing, Jesus Christ Superstar, in those days. You know, just to call Jesus Christ a superstar offended a lot of people, and we had a lot of people out front protesting.
David and Angie came to see Jesus Christ Superstar, and they left in the interval. They hated it. I was mortified. I knew they wouldn't like it. It's not his kind of music.
Now, this is a mutual antipathy, because David left at the interval because he didn't like that style of music. Of course, the world was big enough for both of them.
They should have stayed for the crucifixion. It was brilliant.
Paul Nicholas, who was fabulous, I had to watch him being crucified 8 times a week for a year.
I was particularly good in that bit. I didn't have to do a lot, mind you.
Artistically, Bowie was powering ahead. In 1970, he formed a short-lived band called Hype through the recruitment of Hull guitarist Mick Ronson.
It's impossible to overstate, I think, how important Mick Ronson was to everything that happened.
Mick Ronson was a great guitarist, a genius guitarist.
If anything, Mick Ronson's contribution to David's sound has been underplayed and under-recognised. I think he was crucial, absolutely crucial, to the sound and image.
I don't think he was that comfortable with all the kind of getting down on his knees in front of David and all of that, because he's a straight guy from Hull.
A version of Hype would evolve into The Spiders from Mars and create some of Bowie's most groundbreaking work, starting with The Man Who Sold the World, followed by Hunky Dory, which introduced the sexual ambiguity that would become an important part of Bowie's imagery.
We had Space Oddity, and then there was a lull for a moment, but then came Hunky Dory.
There's David in a dress on the album cover, unheard of, tame by today's standards, where everyone's nearly naked on a pop video.
So David is saying to gay people in the early 70s, don't be afraid, you know, be you. Look what we can do. Look at me.
He was, you know, androgynous, gay. He was outrageous. He wanted to, whether, you know, which way he was, didn't really care.
He was already giving all the signals that he was going to blur the lines.
Mark Bolan, for him, started it.
Mark was kind of androgynous in a way, you know. He had his corkscrew hair, he wore ballet shoes and makeup, and guys hadn't sort of done that before. But absolutely parallel with that, you know, David was developing the Ziggy persona.
He questions notions of gender and of what masculinity is, being a sort of performing artist as opposed to a rock star. But those things have become adopted by a lot of other people since.
The bisexual thing, it was very well timed, you know, suddenly to be gay was kind of cool in those days.
Up until then, nobody was overtly gay. Johnny Ray, who was a huge star, he was gay, but no one knew about it because the fear was no one would buy his records. And I said, you know, and this was the perceived wisdom at the time. You know, I was wrong, but I said, you know, girls buy records and girls have their pop stars. And he said, you know, times are changing. Don't worry about it. And he was so bright, he glammed up and he wore the tinsel, but he didn't say he was gay.
He was always, in my opinion, far more hetero. He was a real man, strangely enough. Although he had, when naked, he had what I'd call childbearing. His hips were bigger than his very thin shoulders. He had a rather odd shape, actually, when Starkers.
He made it okay. You know, you can be successful. You don't have to hide what you are or who you are. And I think that influenced not only other artists, but the public.
One object of Bowie's admiration was New York pop art icon Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol was a massive figure in David's life in the late 60s, early 70s, what the factory was doing in New York.
He said, look, okay, I've written this song for you, Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol it's strangely enough, for me, one of the weirdest songs to give to me because it's very abstract. I don't sing abstract, I sing about emotions. I would rather die than have an Andy Warhol can of soup on my wall. But I never felt that close to the song. It was hard to put any emotion into that because Andy Warhol is not, it's not an emotional song. Then he liked my version so much, he did his own version on the Hunky Dory album.
And he takes a little snooze, tie him up when he's fast asleep, send him on a pleasant cruise.